Alright, I'm going to show you guys what you need to do if you want to remove the power module from the Nintendo Entertainment System. And the reasons you'd want to do that is if you want to do a really good job changing all the capacitors from these, because they do tend to go bad. It's going to allow you to get easier access to the internals, and it's a better method than some of the other ways I've seen it done where people will pry this up. They'll put like a screwdriver in there and they'll bend the metal and change the capacitors that way, and then you're left with the damaged case. So this way you don't have to worry about any of that. Or if you just want to change the whole module completely, if you're having some issues with the switch and you can't figure it out, you can just change the whole thing out with the one that you know that works. So what you're going to need to have to be able to do that, at least what I would recommend, is having some of this stuff here. It's fast chip removal alloy. There's other brands that make it. Going to want to have some flux. This is some good stuff that I use for this and other soldering work that I do, and also a way to remove the solder. Now I'd imagine you could do this with solder braid, but if you look at it, there's some really large amounts of solder in there and it flows underneath, so you're going to have a hard time with some solder braid doing that. Even using this method's kind of hard, but I'd imagine it could be done, but you'd be much better off with some sort of desoldering station like this. Is what I've been using. But let me go ahead and get started. So first thing you're going to want to do is get a whole bunch of flux around these areas, because you got some corrosion. There's a lot of corrosion in these areas typically, and you're going to need to put a lot of flux in there to get some of this stuff to start to flow. And I get some of my alloy in there and I start working it into this material. And what this alloy does is it combines with your solder that's already in there, and it lowers the melting point. Turn my temperature of my iron up a little bit. Once it starts to combine with the solder in there, it's going to help it flow better and just lowers that melting temperature, which is going to come in very handy when you are actually removing the solder. You want to let it work in there for a little while because it needs to combine with all the other solder that's underneath too. It also allows the flux a chance to do its thing. You are definitely going to want to have some sort of way to keep the fumes away from you. I've got a little fan blowing the fumes away. I should really invest in a fume extractor, but if you don't have one, at least get a fan so you're not inhaling all those fumes that are coming off of here, because you can see a whole bunch. Now these pins here are the easiest ones to remove out of this whole process, but you need to remember that these are the ones that are actually making contact to the board, and if you haven't removed all the solder completely when you're taking these out, you can rip traces off. So those ones you need to be very careful and make sure that you've gotten all that out of there. So first thing I'll do is remove those. And you can make sure that all the solder is broken off by testing the pins and make sure they're wiggling loose. That's going to let you know that it's freed up. Now with these ones, you want to make sure that you really are melting all that solder in there, so you're going to want to keep your gun there for a little bit and let it flow. And once it's flowing nice, I usually go to one side and try to let it pull all that it can from that side, and then go to the other side. Typically, you're not going to get all of it the first pass. Sometimes you'll get lucky. Now there's a lot of metal on the other side of this, and there's no sensitive electronics underneath, so you don't really have to worry about it getting too hot for these areas like you would if you're desoldering an IC or something like that. These two back here are a little bit more difficult to get all the solder off than those other two, because the way the metal is exposed on these strips. See if I can get the rest of that out of there. I don't think this is going to be able to get pulled off this first time around, but give it a shot. Yeah, there's too much. Wait a second. Yeah, there's still a little bit too much holding it in for, say, these two here. So you don't want to force it to come out. Add a little bit more flux. Now another reason I like using this alloy when I'm doing this is not only does it lower the melting point, it's also very brittle. As you saw there, it holds on to the heat for a longer period of time than normal solder would. So that's all you have to do to remove that. Now what you want to make sure to do after you're done doing this is remove any trace of this alloy from your part, because it's not going to have as good conductivity as normal solder, and it's more brittle like I was saying before. So you want to clean all that up before you replace it and solder it back in there to make sure that you have the best results. And then for best results, you're definitely going to want to clean this board with some isopropyl alcohol. Get in there with like an old toothbrush or something, or you can use, I've got these anti-static brushes that I bought, and I use these, that way you don't have to worry about any sort of static discharge, although I've never come across that with the toothbrush either. But that's all you have to do, and it's not too difficult to change that out if you're using the right tools. And now you can easily get to the inside of this and change out those capacitors or any other component that might be giving you some problems.